When we think of empathy, we often imagine the ability to understand the emotions of others, something that allows us to connect deeply with their feelings and offer support. However, for those who have experienced trauma, empathy can become something much more profound and, at the same time, more difficult to bear. Carl Jung, in his exploration of the human psyche, offers fascinating insights into how traumatic experiences can shape an individual's empathy, leading to a more intense and complex understanding of the suffering of others. Trauma, at its core, causes a split in the human psyche. It's an event that shakes the foundations of identity, disrupting a sense of security and stability. It often leaves emotional scars that are difficult to heal. For empathetic individuals, who are naturally able to read the emotions of others, this unresolved wound becomes a source of exceptional sensitivity. Instead of fading, their capacity for feeling becomes more acute, allowing their empathy to take on a new dimension, deeper, more complex, and sometimes painful. Jung, speaking of the human psyche, points out that many of its layers are accessible only after confronting our dark side, those aspects of ourselves that are difficult to accept. Trauma, if not properly processed, can become a dark side in an empath's life, affecting how they perceive others and engage in interpersonal relationships. Often, it's not so much the pain we've experienced, but the way we feel and understand it, that makes our empathy profound, sometimes even terrifying. Empaths who have endured difficult experiences possess a talent that cannot be ignored. They can read other people's emotions with remarkable precision, even when they don't express them directly. This sensitivity allows them to empathize with another person's pain, but it also often causes them to experience stronger emotional reactions than those who haven't experienced trauma. What might seem like mere sadness to others can become a real burden for a traumatized empath, not only because they understand the pain but also because they feel it on a deeper level. Jung argued that by understanding one's own trauma and integrating it into one's entire personality, one can transform one's suffering into something powerful, a tool for transformation. Empaths who go through this process can become masters of empathy, capable not only of feeling more deeply but also of providing support that is genuine and effective. Such individuals can become guides for others, as their empathy becomes not only a form of compassion but also a deep connection that allows for a true understanding of another person. However, this process is not easy. It requires the empath to do significant self-improvement, confront their own wounds, and open themselves to the experiences of others without losing their own identity. Trauma, then, instead of being merely a source of suffering, becomes the foundation of a unique ability to understand and help others. However, this gift doesn't come without challenges. The more an empath connects with the emotions of others, the more vulnerable they are to self-loss if they don't develop effective defense mechanisms. It's in this tension between understanding and protecting themselves that an empath discovers their true power. Trauma, at first glance, seems to be something that only destroys. We associate it with pain, suffering, and loss. However, in Carl Jung's psychology, we find the deeper meaning to trauma that can lead to powerful transformation. For empathetic individuals who have experienced trauma, this process not only sharpens their capacity for compassion but can actually transform them into masters of understanding. According to Jungian theory, trauma is one of the most intense experiences that forces us to confront our dark side, the aspect of our psyche that we typically avoid. This is the part of our personality that contains those traits we consider negative or unacceptable, both in ourselves and in others. When an empath experiences trauma, they face the difficult task of integrating this suffering into the rest of their personality. When this process is carried out effectively, it not only heals the individual but also enables them to more fully understand the emotions and needs of others. The empathy that emerges from trauma isn't simply an understanding of someone's emotional state. It's the ability to feel what another person is experiencing deep within one's own psyche. This understanding goes a step further. It becomes almost intuitive. Empaths who have experienced trauma develop the ability to recognize unspoken emotions, subtle signals that may be invisible to others. Their sensitivity is heightened, and their ability to understand the invisible aspects of human experience becomes a strength. Jung spoke of the process of individuation, a path to full self-realization, in which both the dark and light sides of our psyche are integrated. For an empath who has experienced trauma, this process can unfold in a unique way. Trauma becomes a turning point that leads to greater self-awareness. Instead of being merely a source of suffering, it becomes the basis for a deeper connection with others. An empath who has gone through the process of healing their own trauma is able to understand others on a level that goes beyond simple sympathy. They understand not only what they feel, but also why they feel the way they do. Through this process, empaths often develop not only a capacity for deep compassion but also the ability to act as guides and mentors. Their experience of trauma gives them a unique perspective they can share with others, helping them navigate their own struggles. This creates a healing circle in which the empath not only heals themselves but also offers space for others to heal. Such individuals become masters of understanding because their sensitivity to the pain and suffering of others is connected to the inner strength that comes from processing their own trauma. Instead of being a burden, their empathy becomes a source of strength, allowing them not only to feel the pain of others but also to help them in a way that is not disempowering but empowering. This allows them to become someone who not only understands but also creates change, both within themselves and in those they encounter. Trauma, in the context of empathy, is not merely an experience of pain but also a path to a deeper understanding of oneself and others. It is a path that leads to mastery of human emotion and the need to feel compassion at a level that allows for true healing transformation. Empaths who have experienced trauma not only see the pain of others, they feel it in their own skin, which gives them the capacity for true healing. Empathy, when fully developed and healthy, is one of the most powerful tools in interpersonal relationships. However, like any powerful force, it can be distorted if not properly understood and managed. For those who have experienced trauma, empathy can become a burden rather than a gift if it is not fully processed and healed. Jung, in his study of the human psyche, pointed out that ignoring our dark side, our unprocessed wounds and fears, leads to a distortion of the very qualities that were originally intended to serve as our strengths. Empathy is the ability to understand and feel the emotions of others, but when trauma is not processed, this sensitivity can become more of a burden than a gift. Empaths who have not processed their trauma may unconsciously take on the emotions of others, experiencing them in ways that are destructive to them. Such individuals can become hypersensitive to any emotional signals they receive from others, leading to a distorted form of empathy. They become overly involved in others' feelings to the point of losing touch with their own needs and boundaries. In this context, empathy is no longer a tool for supporting others, but becomes a form of self-perpetuation of one's own traumatic experiences. An empathetic person who cannot separate their emotions from those of others may feel completely overwhelmed by the suffering of those around them. In this case, instead of helping, they become codependent on the emotions of others, leading to emotional exhaustion and a sense of lack of control over their own lives. Jung observed that any unresolved trauma tends to manifest itself as a shadow, an unconscious part of our personality that we try to ignore or hide. For empathetic individuals, this shadow can take the form of unhealthy compassion, which is not the result of a conscious choice but a reaction to an unresolved wound. This dark empathy can lead to unhealthy relationships in which the empath feels obligated to save others, even at the cost of their own emotional and mental health. For example, an empath, unable to distinguish their own emotions from those of others, becomes someone who constantly rescues others from their problems but fails to address their own needs. This tendency to rescue others may stem from an unconscious desire to heal their own wounds rather than a genuine desire to help. An empath can take on responsibility for others' problems, leading to a distorted view of interpersonal relationships, where boundaries are blurred and relationships become based on mutual exhaustion. This phenomenon also has its roots in the archetype of the savior, a figure who, although initially fully intending to help, ultimately takes on responsibility for others in a way that harms their own development. In Jungian psychology, this archetype is associated with the feeling that one cannot live in harmony with oneself until one has saved others. However, this way of thinking leads to a distortion of empathy. It becomes a mechanism that does not heal but rather deepens the pain of both the empathizer and those they are trying to help. Unprocessed trauma creates a vulnerability in an empath, which can lead to over-involvement in the lives of others. Instead of connecting their feelings with genuine support, empaths can begin to absorb and internalize the suffering of others, resulting in a distorted form of empathy. This unhealthy empathy, with its lack of clear boundaries, can lead to a state of chronic emotional exhaustion, a sense of being overwhelmed, and in extreme cases, burnout. Jung suggested that to achieve balance, empaths must learn to distinguish their own emotions from those of others and face their own wounds. Only then can their empathy become a true healing tool, both for themselves and others. Instead of being a prisoner of their trauma, empaths can become guides and supporters for others without having to sacrifice themselves. Jung viewed archetypes as fundamental, universal images and roles that are rooted in our unconscious and influence our behaviors, emotions, and interactions. Every person, regardless of culture or time, carries within them these primal patterns that shape their self-perception and relationships with others. For empathetic individuals who have experienced trauma, these archetypes take on a special form because trauma influences how these patterns manifest in daily life. In the context of empathy and trauma, certain archetypes become more pronounced, shaping our rules and interpersonal relationships. One of the most prominent archetypes in this dynamic is the rescuer archetype, which often manifests in empaths who have experienced trauma. A person who has experienced pain and suffering often becomes someone who feels compelled to help others to regain balance in their lives. In this case, trauma not only impacts the capacity for feeling and compassion but also gives profound meaning to the role an empath plays in interactions with others. The rescuer archetype, while seemingly positive, can lead to unhealthy patterns in interpersonal relationships if not balanced. An empath who takes on this role may feel that only by rescuing others can they feel worthwhile. This type of thinking, while initially helpful, often leads to burnout, as the empath forgets their own emotional needs. Furthermore, it becomes a paradigm of unresolved trauma. The individual not only tries to fix themselves but also tries to fix others, which can become an unhealthy defense mechanism. Jung also noted the existence of other archetypes that can manifest in an empath's life, such as the victim and the warrior. Trauma, especially if processed incorrectly, can lead an empath to assume the role of a victim, unable to move beyond their suffering and remaining passive. On the other hand, the warrior archetype can manifest when an empath becomes overly determined to fight for the well-being of others, at the expense of their own emotional well-being. Each of these archetypes, while having its benefits, requires conscious management to prevent them from taking over the empath's life. Trauma, if unprocessed, can lead to these roles being taken over unconsciously, leaving the empath stuck in a single pattern, unable to balance their needs with those of others. Often, to break these patterns, the empath must understand how the trauma has impacted their perception of themselves and others, and learn to establish boundaries that allow them to care for themselves in a healthy way. For empaths who have experienced trauma, archetypes can also manifest as caregiver or mentor, roles that offer a space for healing for themselves and others. A person who has experienced their own trauma and successfully healed can become a leader in their community, offering help and guidance to others in similar situations. This type of role, when consciously embraced, becomes a force for the empath, allowing them to heal both themselves and others in a balanced way. Empathic archetypes are therefore inextricably linked to the healing process. Trauma does not necessarily determine the role an empath plays in interpersonal relationships, but can be the key to a deeper understanding and integration of these archetypes in a way that supports both the individual and their interactions with others. Through healing, empaths have the opportunity to reshape their self-image and the role they play in the lives of others, allowing them to fully realize their potential, both emotionally and socially. Empathy, in its most healing form, is not just the capacity for compassion or empathy. For an empath who has experienced trauma, empathy can become something far more powerful, a tool for transformation, both personal and social. Carl Jung, in his work on the individuation process, pointed out that true healing lies not only in the healed aspect of oneself, but in the full acceptance of all parts of one's personality, both the dark and the light. For an empath who has experienced trauma, it is empathy, after processing pain and suffering, that becomes the key to full transformation. Starting with a basic definition, empathy is the ability to understand and feel the emotions of others, but when processed through the lens of trauma, it becomes a tool that allows the empath to connect with the most hidden and painful aspects of themselves. An empathic person who has experienced their own suffering has the opportunity to use their sensitivity as a way to heal not only themselves but also others. Trauma need not remain merely a source of pain, it can become the foundation for a deeper connection that fosters both personal and collective transformation. Jung observed that trauma can be a starting point for a deeper understanding of oneself. By engaging with their own wounds, an empath begins to see how their suffering can become material to be processed and, subsequently, a tool for healing. For an empath who has experienced trauma, healing is not about forgetting the pain but about reframing it into something that can be useful in helping others. Once the trauma is processed, the empath becomes a conscious participant in the healing process, which encompasses not only themselves but also others who struggle with similar difficulties. The process of transformation through empathy can take many forms. One of the most important steps is confronting one's own suffering, acknowledging it, understanding its sources, and working through it in a way that not only brings relief but also shifts perspective. Empaths who have undergone this process become fully aware of their own emotions, and this awareness allows them to deeply understand and support others. This understanding is not superficial. Empaths can walk in the shoes of others in a way that involves not only a sense of compassion but also active participation in their emotional journey. Jung said that the process of individuation is not only a return to wholeness, it is also becoming more aware of one's unique life paths. An empath who has experienced trauma is able to use their experiences to create their own healing paths. This process is both individual and collective. An empath who has found healing within themselves can become a guide, leader, and teacher for others who are at the beginning of their healing journey. However, the true power of empathy as a path to healing lies in its ability to create a space in which others can experience healing. An empath who has experienced their own trauma becomes someone who not only feels the pain of others but also actively helps them through the healing process. Empathy, in this form, is a deeper understanding, a bridge that connects the individual experience with the collective. An empath who has healed themselves can support others on their journey to emotional and spiritual health, offering them space to understand their own suffering. Trauma that has been processed is no longer just a source of pain but becomes an invaluable source of strength. The empathy that stems from experiencing trauma then becomes not only a tool for understanding and compassion but also a tool for change and transformation. Through this transformation, the empath who has been through pain becomes someone who helps transform that same pain into a healing force. Intuition is the ability to understand things without the need for logical reasoning, to feel something that isn't immediately visible. For empaths who have experienced trauma, intuition becomes an incredibly valuable tool for recognizing the emotions, energies, and intentions of others. In his research on the psyche, Carl Jung emphasized that the development of intuition is an integral part of the individuation process, in which an individual approaches full self-awareness. For an empath who has experienced trauma, intuition becomes a path to a deeper understanding of themselves and others, as well as to better read the energies of those around them. Trauma has a profound impact on how we perceive the world and others. When we experience suffering, our psyche becomes hyper-aware of any signals that might indicate danger, pain, or a need for help. This heightened senses, stemming from trauma, impacts our ability to read the energies of others. Empaths who have endured difficult experiences often become more sensitive to subtle changes in others' behavior, changes in tone of voice, body language, or even unspoken thoughts that hang in the air. This heightened intuition allows them to read others' emotions at a deeper level than might be possible through superficial interactions. Jung believed that trauma has the potential to open the mind to deeper levels of perception. Trauma forces us to confront our sensitivity, and thus our ability to feel others on an energetic level. What for those who haven't experienced trauma may be merely superficial contact with emotions, for an empath is a true depth that cannot be ignored. In this sense, trauma can be a catalyst for the development of intuition. An empath who has undergone suffering becomes more capable of reading the energy of others because their own experience has become more complex and multi-layered. Trauma that remains unresolved can lead to hypersensitivity, where an empath attributes negative intentions or emotions to others, even when they don't express them openly. Because of this, intuition, although enhanced, can also become a burden. Empaths who don't learn to manage their intuition may begin to interpret other people's energy through the lens of their own pain, which can lead to misjudgments and excessive emotional burden. For example, someone who has experienced trauma related to rejection may sense rejection in every interaction, even if it's not the other person's intention. Jung suggested that the key to fully utilizing intuition lies in integrating our traumatic experiences with our own consciousness. Only when an empath consciously processes their own suffering will they be able to accurately read the energy of others, without identifying it with their own inner pain. This process involves recognizing which emotions and energies are real and which are merely projections of their own unresolved wounds. For an empath who has gone through this process, intuition becomes a clear tool that allows for a deeper understanding of others without the burden of personal emotional baggage. Empathy and intuition are, in fact, two sides of the same coin. Intuition gives an empath the ability to pick up on subtle energies in interpersonal relationships, but how these energies are interpreted depends on how well the empath has integrated their traumas and how healthily they manage their sensitivity. Trauma that has been processed gives an empath the ability to read the energies of others in a more balanced and healthy way, enabling them not only to understand others' emotions but also to assist them in their own healing processes. Empathy is an incredibly powerful gift, but also a tremendous burden, especially for those who have experienced trauma. Empathetic individuals, especially those who have endured difficult experiences, often tend to absorb the emotions and energy of others. This ability to empathize with others' feelings can become not only a gift but also a source of chronic exhaustion. In his work on psychology, Carl Jung noted that to achieve complete psychological balance, an individual must learn to manage their energy, which is particularly important for empathetic individuals, who tend to over-involve themselves in the emotions of others. For an empath who has experienced trauma, managing energy becomes a key element in the healing process. Without appropriate protective mechanisms, an empath can begin to lose touch with their own emotional boundaries, absorbing not only the emotions of others but also their pain and suffering. What initially appears to be a natural capacity for compassion can become an uncontrolled response, leading to exhaustion and, in extreme cases, emotional burnout. Jung emphasized that a key element of the individuation process is the ability to understand and integrate one's own emotions and experiences without unconsciously projecting them onto others. For an empath who has experienced trauma, this means learning to distinguish one's own emotions from those of others. Otherwise, the empath may unconsciously tap into the energy of others, leading to burnout, the feeling that everything is too much and I have nothing left to share. To protect their energy from depletion, empaths need to learn a few key principles. Setting boundaries. Establishing healthy boundaries is essential to preventing empaths from letting other people's emotions or problems transfer to them. Learning to say no at appropriate times, respectfully but firmly, is crucial. Empaths must know when to refrain from engaging in others' problems so as not to overstep their own energetic boundaries. Conscious energy cleansing. Empaths should regularly practice energy clearing techniques that help them detach from the emotions of others. Examples of such techniques include meditation, conscious breathing, yoga, and visualization, which help clear out foreign energies and regain their inner balance. Regular practice of these methods is essential for maintaining emotional health. Rest and time for yourself. It's important for empaths to spend time alone, away from the emotional turmoil of others. This is the only way to recharge their energy and engage in a process of introspection that will allow them to consciously manage their emotions. Time for themselves is not a luxury, but a necessity for mental and emotional health. Consciously connecting with positive energy sources. Empaths should strive to surround themselves with people and environments that energize them, not drain them. Supportive, positive relationships that don't require an empath to rescue others are essential to maintaining a healthy energetic balance. Furthermore, spending time in nature, in a quiet and peaceful environment, can help restore inner harmony. Self-esteem and self-care. Empaths must learn to take care of themselves, because only when they feel whole and content with themselves can they offer true support to others. Practices such as caring for their physical, emotional, and spiritual health, as well as recognizing their own needs, are fundamental to a healthy life for empaths. Acceptance of one's own sensitivity. One of the most important steps in protecting our energy is accepting our sensitivity as a gift, not a weakness. Trauma doesn't have to define an empath, but it can be a starting point for understanding ourselves and our unique energetic needs. Once empaths accept their sensitivity, they begin to understand how to protect it, rather than allowing it to exploit and drain them. The process of protecting one's energy isn't achieved once and for all. It's a continuous process that requires self-discipline, introspection, and conscious emotional management. For an empath who has experienced trauma, it's not only a process of protecting themselves from exhaustion but also a path of healing and regaining inner strength. This conscious management of their energy allows an empath not only to live a healthy life but also to fully utilize their gift to help others.